Hey, what's up guys? So this will be part 2 to the video I began yesterday about the Nordish Races. So yesterday I directed you to a very useful website called the Society of Nordish Anthropology, and they have a Nordish gallery there which has examples of various blonde races, various Nordids and Nordo-Cro-Magnons, and a few peripheral types. Today I'll be taking you through examples of these types from the photographic supplement to a book called The Races of Europe. I'm going to, I'll be using the terms dolichocephalic and brachycephalic, which mean relatively long-headed, length long and width relatively narrow, and brachycephalic, which means high width and relatively short length. Now we will be talking about Borrowbees, who have great dimensions in terms of length and width, but their skulls are very wide. So I'm going to work through Carleton Coon's Races of Europe. I'm going to work through from the Nordid types to the Troender type, which are Nordid and Cro-Magnon blends, to the Cro-Magnon types, and then I'm going to talk about some peripheral Nordids. So I'm going to take you through various images. Rightio, so we'll start with the corded type. This is a recapitulation of the original Nordid type, which is a very large-skulled Mediterranean strain. Gracile, skeletally, but as I've said, with a very large skull. Very high vault and a very long skull. So here we have a corded recapitulation. This is a Finn. As you can see, he's true to the Nordid type. And then this next image we have here is another corded recapitulation. This gentleman is actually the son of one of the Borrowbees, which I'll show later, which shows that recapitulations can happen in individuals of mixed subracial parentage. This is another corded example. This is a Swede from Sonderham, and as you can see, he fits the type, high and long-skulled. Typical Nordid metrics. And then we move on to this is a corded British descent corded example, New Englander. Moving on from the corded Nordids, we've got what might be called Nordid proper. It's also referred to as the Hallstatt type, but what's sometimes called the Hallstatt type tends to have a little bit of some other elements. So this is the northern Iron Age Hallstatt type. The type that was associated with the wave from the Hallstatt culture is actually the lower vaulted Celtic Nordid, which we'll come to in a second. But this is the classical Nordid type, and this fellow is Norwegian from Drangedal. Then we have another Nordid proper. Again, this is an Englishman. This is a fellow from London, and as you can see, he fits the Nordid type perfectly. He's got the sharp and pointed long occiput there, and he has a relatively high skull as well, in contrast to the more usual English Celtic Nordid, which we'll come to in a second. So, now we have a Celtic Nordid from England. This Englishman is from Ipswich, and as you can see, his features are slightly more archaic, and they show some admixture, some deviance from the original corded form, which we've shown initially, and yeah, he also has lower vault, less pointed occiput. Here's another Celtic Nordid, very similar metrically. This individual is from Clare in Ireland. The Celtic Nordid was already in Ireland prior to Germanic influence, which brought the more typical Nordid variety as well as more of the corded variety forming through it. And now we have, I just want to show a few, there are a couple of Nordids in Coon's section on the Jews, and this fellow here is true to the Nordic type. He's a New York Jew of Rhinelander descent, obviously through admixture with locals. His phenotype, his subracial type, doesn't show his Jewishness at all. And here, similarly, he points out that the nasal tip shows some influence, but this is an Illinois Jew of Russian descent, who again fits the Nordic type for the most part. And now we move on to a special subtype, special archaic and especially low vaulted and long skulled subtype of the Celtic Nordid. It's mesocephal, like a lot of these Nordids I've shown. The corded examples were dolichocephalic, but these Celtic Nordid examples are mostly mesocephalic. So here are two examples of the special Aran subtype of the Aran Isles in between Ireland and Britain. Here is a higher-headed example. Note that the type is especially low-headed, but here is a higher-headed blonder example of the Aran subtype. And here is the more archaic strain, which tends to be more brunette and lower-headed still. It's got a very, very low volt. Then we move on to some exotic Nordids. So these are Nordids in other people groups in which the Nordid type doesn't usually appear. So here you can see we have a Chuvash who fits the Nordid type to a T. He shows basically no other influence. Then we have a Portuguese fellow here. Nordids are present in Iberia, especially in the north. I mean, Iberia had Visigothic and also Swabian Vandal influences to a lesser degree. And then you can see here we have an Albanian from the Geg cell subset. The Albanians have two groups called Gegs and Tosks, which show more Northern European features. The Gegs in particular have a Nordid strain, so this is part of that rarer Nordid strain among the Gegs. And he's of the Luma tribe, which even among Gegs has a particular display of the Nordid subrace. And then we move on to a few from elsewhere. Here we've got an upper-class Russian from the Kharkov government. So he mentions various elements here. There may have been Scythian influence, Scythian Nordic influences in the area already, and then obviously in the formation of the early Russian formation, pre-Russia, the Rus was a Viking state, and Slavics already had a Nordic strain. So there could be up to 3 sources of this element in the area. And then we have 2 from Northern Africa. This is a Riffian Berber, who is perfectly Nordid craniometrically. You'll come to some other Riffian examples, which are more Cro-Magnon in environmental 3. And then here is a Kabil from northern Algeria. He's a smaller-headed Nordic, so he's more like the typical Mediterranean type. This has been Nordids. I hope you've enjoyed. The Troender type will be next.